Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guest today is Joe St. George, the national political correspondent for Scripps. That's the parent company for News Channel 5. Joe, is this election going to be usually a particular referendum or election like this becomes a referendum on the sitting president? But given the sort of unique situation that Donald Trump's in, is it a referendum for is it going to be a referendum on both of them, particularly when you look at some of those Senate races you were talking about?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake that political pundits can make is try to compare this to 1994 or 2010. 94 is when the red wave happened in the Clinton years, the first midterm after Bill Clinton became president. 2010, the first midterm after the presidency of Barack Obama began. This doesn't feel like 2010 or 1994. And one reason is the unprecedented issues that we're talking about. We're talking about 40-year high inflation. We're talking about a border that hasn't seen numbers like this. We're talking about a former president that hasn't played a role in a midterm election like this. Probably, I mean, you got to go back to Nixon to have somewhat of a comparison. We haven't had an abortion ruling like this come out so quickly in front of a midterm election. So I don't think we can go to history to find any parallels, and that's why I think it's a fool's errand to try and predict what's going to happen.
In terms of rising gas prices, OPEC, along with Saudi Arabia and Russia, are now cutting back their production of oil by 2 million barrels a day. Price of gas is going to shoot up again. That's not good news for the president. There are some talk by one of the leading Democrats in Washington, Bob Martinez, the senator there from New Jersey. He wants to cut off all ties now with Saudi Arabia. President Biden says there should be consequences for the Saudis, but is he willing to go that far?
First off, we could do an entire 30 minutes on the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's complicated. First off, it's a bit of a slap in the face that Saudi Arabia took this position after President Biden spent a lot of political capital, at least international political capital, by making that trip to Saudi Arabia earlier this year to essentially ask him to stay on our side. And for this to happen is certainly a slap in the face. Remember, Saudi Arabia, that trip was highly criticized because of Jamal Khashoggi and the journalists and the death and the involvement of Saudi Arabia. So it was a lot of political capital spent to get this result in the end. As we go to this next chapter, how does the U.S. respond to this is going to be very, very important.
Well, you've got the NOPEC bill that's also that Chuck Schumer seems to be pushing, and that would basically let the Justice Department bring lawsuits, antitrust lawsuits against OPEC and other countries because of the violation of antitrust laws here. Is that the way to go forward with this? That's a pretty big slap back at the Saudis.
Well, it's easy to go to voters and to go to a campaign rally and say, let's penalize the Saudis for these high gas prices. But when you speak to diplomats in this city's foreign affairs experts in this city, they say, wait a minute, do we really want Saudi Arabia to be fully under the influence of Vladimir Putin all of a sudden? What happens if Saudi Arabia completely banishes us as one of their partners, if you will, however you want to define the relationship in the Middle East? So it's complicated. The reason that the U.S. tries to have somewhat of a relationship with Saudi Arabia, even though of all of their alleged human rights abuses, is because they don't want to completely lose any influence in that country. Its geographic location is just too critical to global stability.
All this comes in a specter of the situation where the war in Ukraine, Ukrainians seem to be doing much better. The Russians are coming back with a new terror campaign in terms of how they're doing the shelling over there. Nobody thinks that's going to make a big difference, but is Putin getting desperate enough that we may have seen nuclear weapons come into play?
Well, it certainly was a terrifying report that President Biden said a few days ago, predicting that an Armageddon is possible as a direct result of nuclear war. We do have NATO officials, defense officials saying that if there was ever a use of a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, it would prompt a physical response. Remember, American troops have not been involved in this process, but if President Putin uses a bomb like that, that may challenge, it may change that really quickly and force NATO to take action. It though is clear. I mean, you just got to read the reports out of Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is doing so much better than people thought they would be at the beginning of this crisis. Nobody thought that they would be standing off what on paper is a much bigger and stronger army than they are. So the U.S. Is attempting to walk the line very finely here, not send American troops, but send plenty of aid. We've spent north of $50 billion on this war in Ukraine already, Pat.
Another unexpected disappointment for the president. He thought that he and his administration had settled the potential nationwide rail strike that was set to happen a couple of weeks ago. Now one of the major unions there has rejected the agreement. The strike won't come until after the middle of November, but that's a bad time for that to happen because everybody's be doing their holiday shopping and the supply chain may grind to a halt in some ways.
The unions really threw President Biden a bone here, Pat, by not having this strike take place before Election Day. I mean, could you imagine that image of rails stalled, our nation's rails stalled as a direct result of this? So we shall see. I've covered enough of these union negotiations to say these things usually come down to the wire in the last minute. I suspect we'll have another one of these scenarios again. Certainly President Biden doesn't want another supply chain crisis on his hands.
Coming down to the very end, we're certainly doing that not only with this potential rail strike, but also with the election in general. Joe St. George, thank you so much for joining us on the program. I always appreciate your insights and your ability to look nationwide on what's going on. And it's going to be interesting between now and November the 8th, and perhaps most interesting on November the 8th to look at all those Senate races. And for that matter, what happens in the House as well in terms of what the majority might be one way or the other for the Republicans. So again, we thank you for joining us today.
Good to see you, sir.
And thank you for joining us on Inside Politics. I'll be back here again for a future show. If you can't get enough politics in the meantime, you can go to the website. You'll find my Capitol View commentary there. There's a new commentary posted every Friday afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you back here next time. Goodbye.